So, has anybody ever heard that people like to say that the book of Daniel was written after all the events took place?
Yeah, we've heard that.
Yeah. Heard that because nobody could have predicted that, right? Yeah. Did you know that Ezra and Daniel are both written the same way? Ezra and Daniel lived about the same time. The book of Daniel matches the writing style of the Elephantine papyrus, or papyri, because there's lots of them. Do you know what the Elephantine letters were?
Big letters.
They were letters that were written by captives in Babylon to family and friends that had decided to stick it out. Where do you think?
Jerusalem.
No, they had to leave Jerusalem.
Oh.
Where did they go?
Babylon?
Egypt.
Oh.
There was a group that went to Egypt. They eventually got wiped out. But up until that time, they were living in Egypt. And then afterwards, there were some people that still managed to make their way down into Egypt. And so the book of Daniel is written in the same style, the same Hebrew style, as the letters of the Elephantine. And they said that that word style is about the 7th century BC, which is the 600s BC, all the way up until the 5th century Aramaic papyri. So that means that the book of Daniel was written sometime between 600 BC and about 400 or 500 BC. When did Daniel live? 600 BC into about 500 BC, depending on how old he was when he died. Okay, so they accept the writing in Ezra, deny the writing in Daniel, because Ezra doesn't really have a lot of prophecy in it, whereas Daniel is very prophetic. That is the only difference between the two. All right, this one is just another document from a Dr. Tim White, who's talking about the influence of the Akkadian into the Hebrew. At this point, they were using some Aramaic, but it just goes to show that it's the same thing, that 500 to 600s BC. All right, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Nobody could figure it out. We have the head of gold. What comes next?
Chest and arms of silver.
Chest and arms of silver. What's next? Belly and thighs of brass or bronze, basically the same thing. Legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. And where are we? We are, where'd it go? Oh, it's not on there. We're at the very, very, very tip of the toenail. We're on the toenail that's grown too long that needs trimmed. That's where we are. All right, then we have an uncut stone that comes in, smashes the statue, and then grows and takes over the whole world. So let's look at this. Head of silver and gold. Head of gold. Which kingdom? Babylon. Chest and arms? Medo-Persia. Belly and thighs? Greece. Legs? Rome. Feet and divided Rome. Modern civilization. Oh, there's my little thing. That's where we are. All right. Did you know that basically Daniel's entire ministry is that dream over and over and over again, just with more details each time? That was Daniel's life vision. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and a vision. Ended up being Daniel's whole life work. All right, the dream was repeated this time in animal form. Ancient Babylon is famous for the Lamassu, which was a lion with a man's head and wings. And Daniel's vision, it is a lion with wings. All right, we just talked about these earlier. There's Nebuchadnezzar's little piece here. So this here is a brick from Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar's information stamped on it. Basically says, I'm number one. This is a fragment of a brick that came from that region. I'll get it here and then pass it around.
Where's that from?
That one's from Babylon. I forget where they found that one. But it basically says the same thing over and over. I am Nebuchadnezzar the great king. Hear me roar. All right. You have Nebuchadnezzar's grandson sees bloodless hand writing on the wall. Nobody can figure it out. They call for Daniel. Was it actually King Nebuchadnezzar's grandson? That's the big question. Answer? Yes. Bible says, I've given these lands in the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, and all nations shall serve him, his son, and his son's son. Now, was Nebuchadnezzar's father, was Belshazzar's father Nebuchadnezzar's son? No. Term for his son's son, they didn't have a word for grandson. So son's son would be their way of saying grandson. However, he was Nebuchadnezzar's son-in-law. Nebuchadnezzar's daughter married this guy. So you have Nebuchadnezzar ruling, then his son ruling, then his son-in-law ruling. Then you have his grandson who ruled for like 3 to 9 months. He was so bad they had to kick him out. Then you had another son-in-law rule, and then Belshazzar co-ruled for 3 years with his father. He never actually got to rule by himself. The Babylonians considered that if you didn't get to rule by yourself, forget it, you weren't a ruler. If you had to have daddy hold your hand, that's not ruling. According to the way that the Jews calculated rules, oh, you're ruling? We don't care if you're ruling with daddy, you're ruling. So the Jews would say that that was a king all on his own, whereas the Babylonians would basically consider that like a prime minister or vice president. All right, Medo-Persia. Bear raised up on one side, a goat with one horn longer than the other. Here's a silver goat cup that they discovered. They found 40,000 talents of silver, 9,000 talents of gold. I believe that was in Susa. May have been another Persian city, but that is a lot of gold and silver. They would be more powerful. They would defeat Babylon, Egypt, and Turkey. And did you know that there's a connection between Medo-Persia and Babylon? Here, who knows that there is a genetic connection between the two? Let's see how they connect. So, you have Nebuchadnezzar's father working with Xerxes the Mede to defeat the Scythians. So they're working together, they defeat the Scythians. So Nebuchadnezzar's father, he has a daughter and he has Nebuchadnezzar. Well, he gives his daughter to his war partner, Xerxes the Mede. They have Astyages and possibly Amystis, but Xerxes may have also had Amystis with a different wife. We're not exactly sure. Records aren't that clear. You may know her, Amystis, because she is the one that Nebuchadnezzar built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon from. Who's heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? Okay. She was at least, by any account, she was at least his niece-in-law, if not possibly his niece. But he married her, built her the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. They had a son called Evil Merodach, or Evil Marduk. Okay, then through another wife, he had an unnamed daughter who had Belshazzar with King Nebuchadnezzar. Another Nebuchadnezzar. All right, let's look at Astyages. Astyages had Darius the Mede and a little girl called Mandane. The girl had a son called Cyrus the Great. Darius the Mede had a daughter whom Cyrus the Great married. He married his first cousin. Belshazzar was defeated by Darius and Cyrus. Nebuchadnezzar married his niece or niece-in-law. Darius the Mede was his nephew or great-nephew, depending on how you look at things. Cyrus was a great-great-nephew, and Belshazzar and Darius were second cousins. Did you realize that? They were fighting their own family. All right, Darius, Xerxes II. You won't find his name Darius in history because that was what the Jews called him. Everywhere else he was known as Xerxes II. He had a heron stele. Remember I said earlier that they refused to mention the name of kings that they didn't like. It was considered the ultimate diss. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, who was Belshazzar's father, said that this guy was given, he was living in Haran, which, where else do we see Haran in the Bible? Abraham. Abraham, Laban, Jacob, they all lived in Haran. Nebuchadnezzar went to Haran. He lived in Haran for a long time. He was living in Haran. That's the reason Belshazzar was back in Babylon. The Babylonians didn't like him very much. So he left this stela saying that there was a certain king of the Medes that was giving him fits and he couldn't stand. That certain king, Xerxes II. Then we have Cyrus the Great. He was predicted 100 years before he was born. God called him by name 100 years before he was born. He's the one that said, okay, Darius died. It's the 70 years ends now. He was shown that prophecy, or at least somebody in that area knew the prophecy. And he set them free. He said, okay, you can go home now. You can go back to Jerusalem. You're no longer captives. We've got the Cyrus cylinder. All right. This cylinder here, it's partially broken. But the portion that's not broken tells about how Cyrus ended the captivity of the Jews. So careful, it's heavy, but pass that around. So there is a non-biblical source for freeing the Jews and letting them go home, back to Jerusalem and Israel. All right, Darius the Great, famous for his building projects, lots and lots of building projects. Look, all those people carved into the stairs. There is. They just found this piece right here with his name on it. Right here. Made international news about them finding this tablet. Somebody was just walking along the ground one day, saw it on the ground. Oh, wow, look. And it's got writing on it, Darius the Great. All of the scientists and the archaeologists were going on and on and on about it. That was about 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday. They'd been studying it for months, if not years. Guess what happened Sunday? Somebody called up the Israeli Antiquities Bureau. Said, guess what? What you have is a fake. You know how I know it's a fake? I'm the one that made it. I was giving a class there. I'm an expert on ancient languages, and we were doing a demonstration, and I just left the pieces there. Now, it had gone through all sorts of scientific testing and dating. It had experts from around the world studying it, and not one of them caught the fact that this was a new artifact. Now, does that make you put a lot of trust in archaeologists and historians? Nope. All right, Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I. Where do you know him from? Esther, the king of Esther. All right, we've got a tablet that actually has the names of the people that are listed. See, the beginning of Esther, it lists all the names of the king's associates. Those are all the Hebrew versions of the names, but when you translate it into Greek and Medo-Persian and blah, 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 you end up with these other names, and they're all there. And then that's his tomb. He built his tomb, his father built his tomb high up in the mountains. And then once they got high up in the mountains, then they went even higher to the middle of the mountain. They really didn't want tomb robbers there. You think you could easily sneak into that tomb? Nope. Then we have Nebuchadnezzar's stepson. You know what his nickname was? Long-handed. Why do you think his nickname was long-handed? His left hand was longer than his right hand by apparently a whole lot. How would you like to go through life with somebody call you long ears? Long ears, big nose. That's kind of a cruel nickname, don't you think? But that was him, and we've got his records. There's his tomb. See, they built really high up. He's the one that did the 457 BC decree. Gave him that's when he ruled when the 2300 years began. He's the king that issued the decree that started the 2300 years. And when it says the queen by his side, you have to wonder if the queen by his side wasn't the previous queen, the queen mother in respects, or if it was actually his wife. Because do you think Esther wouldn't have had a say in what was happening? Do you know how old this kid was when Esther started to rule? About 3 or 4. His whole life, he would have been around Esther and Mordecai. And Mordecai was the prime minister. His dad only ruled for 20 years. All the stuff that went down with Haman was in the 12th and 13th year of the king's rule. So that meant that Mordecai was prime minister about 6 years before the king was killed by his own chamberlains. They finally succeeded. Yay! Not really. So Mordecai would have been there right about the time that this king was between 14 and 16 years old, being raised to be either a leader in the kingdom or the actual king. So you think Esther and Mordecai had some influence on him? Maybe just slightly. All right, now we get to enter the Greeks. Did you know the Bible predicts Alexander the Great? Yep, there he is. They did a facial reconstruction to see what he may have looked like today. That's what he may have looked like if you're not looking at that. But the Greeks took great pride in their bronze work. They're well known for their bronzes. What were they represented by in the statue? Bronze. He also he was going to destroy, according to Josephus, he was heading to Egypt to destroy the Jews there. And he had a dream that said, don't you dare destroy the Jews. And instead of destroying them, he made it a safe haven for them. And that's maybe where Joseph and Mary fled to later. We don't really know where in Egypt they fled to, but they probably went to some place like Alexandria, one of those places that were accepting of Jews. All right, the Greeks have 5 of the 7 wonders of the world. 5 of them. Do we have archaeological records of those? Yes, we do. We have Greece and Turkey and ruins from a lighthouse. The Greeks were kind of everywhere. They weren't just in Greece. They were controlling the world. We can still see them today. Anybody been to Nashville? If you go to Nashville, there's a complete full-scale replica of the Parthenon there. Absolutely huge. They took great pride in their building projects. The top pictures are what some of the archaeological sites looked like before they were excavated. The bottom pictures of what it looked like after they dug it up. So you can never know what's under the ground when you start digging. Very different. All right. Alexander the Great dies. His kingdom gets divided into 4. What did the Bible say? Kingdom would get divided into 4. We see that. All right. Then if you look in Daniel 11, which is another part of the vision, it talks about, it says, the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. She shall not retain power. She shall be given up. A branch of her roots shall stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, deal against him, and that person shall continue more years than the king of the north. Did you know that actually happened? And we know who. If you look, the daughter of the south is a girl named Bernice. She was given in a trade agreement by her father, Ptolemy II, to this guy called Antiochus II. Antiochus II was already married, though. Do you think his first wife liked the fact that he had a new wife? She managed to convince the king to give her up, but then guess what the first wife did? She killed them both. She's like, ain't having none of that. So the king was dead, the bride was dead, her father was dead, her brother decides, all right, I know how to handle this. Her brother from Egypt comes up to Turkey, takes care of the Turks and the Greeks that were messing with his sister, or that had killed his sister, and he outlived the first wife's second son. And these are pictures of all the people that were involved in this. We have all their archaeological records. So there's a part of Daniel that's proven true, and you can go through all of chapter 11 of Daniel and pull all this information out. All right, Rome was known for its iron might. Now, Rome went through and they devoured everybody in their path. We have Julius Caesar. We still use a version of his calendar today. We've edited it slightly, but he's the one that basically develops the calendar in use today. We have Herod the not so great and Caesar Augustus. Where do we see these people in the Bible? We see them with Jesus. Augustus was the ruler who was ruling Rome at the time, and Herod was the ruler of Judea. Pilate, we have records of him too. They used to say Pilate didn't exist, and even if he did exist, he wasn't ruler of Judea. Well, guess what they found? They found a tablet that said Pilate, proctofector or ruler of Judea. There goes that theory out of the water. All right, then we get past the life of Christ. We're starting to get closer to 70 AD. Does anybody know what happened in 70 AD? Destruction of Jerusalem again. All right, we have Nero, worst guy ever. Him and his mother, Agrippina the Younger, started to be responsible for killing the Christians. So after Christ died, what were Christ's followers called? Christians. Before that, were there any Christians? No, because Christ hadn't come yet. They were a mother-son pair. They started prosecuting the Christians. Then you have, 200 years later, Constantine I and Helena. They ended the persecution of the Christians. So the Christian persecution was literally bookended by two mother-son pairs that were rulers of Rome. All right, General Titus, he was a future emperor. If you go to, I believe it's France, you'll see the Arch of Titus. I could be wrong about the location of the country. But you'll see an Arch of Titus praising how great Titus was. Yay, Titus. All right, they weren't supposed to burn the temple because regardless, this was Belshazzar's problem. In the New Testament, some of the missionaries to other places, they went to this town and they were seeing all of these idols, and they come to this one place and there's no name on the altar. What was the name on the altar? To the what? To the unknown God. We're giving praise to the unknown God because we don't want to what? We don't want to offend any God that we might not know about. So they were taking extra precautions. Belshazzar took temple cups and temple things that were supposed to be holy, and not only did he not treat them with respect, he was being extremely disrespectful, which was even against his own culture. Whether or not you believed in that God or not, you always treated the opposing people's special artifacts, special things with respect. He was going against even his own culture. Titus went in, they took the treasure out of the temple. They weren't supposed to burn the temple, but some greedy little soldier stuck his head in, saw gold, saw so much gold. You ever been so shocked that you just lose all muscle control? That's kind of what this soldier did. Dropped the thing, and all the gold started melting, and then everybody stopped fighting, trying to catch gold. Temple got burned, and then they completely ransacked Jerusalem. So this is Titus over here, and what he may have looked like. This is his father, Vespasian. Vespasian was the king at the time. Titus was his general. When Vespasian was gone, Titus then took the crown. All right. Vespasian ordered the invasion of Israel and used the spoils of the war from the destruction of the temple to build the Colosseum, which ended up killing the Christians, main center of Christian killing. So he took the house of God and used it to persecute the people of God. All right, prophecies of Jesus. Jesus departed from the temple, said, "There will be not one stone left upon another." Everybody agree with that statement? Mm-hmm. Did you know that he wasn't just referring to the temple? He came near and he beheld the city and wept over it. Before they even got into the city, he's standing over the city, looking at it from above, said, "There will not be, it will lay thee even with the ground and not leaving thee one stone upon another." Then they get inside of the city to the temple, and he repeats himself. Double prophecy. That means what? In the Bible, if something's told more than once, it's told twice. What did Joseph say? Pharaoh, you've had this dream of this famine not once but twice. It's a surety it is going to happen. Caesar gave the orders. This is from the Josephus, Book of the Jewish War. There are 3 towers and a portion of the western wall. Was it the western wall of the temple or western wall of the city? City. All right, here's a picture of the city. Where's the temple? All right, see this compass rose here? North is that way, south that way, west is that way, and east is that way. Where's the temple located in the city? On the east. What was still remaining of the city according to Josephus? Western wall of the city, a portion of the western wall of the city. That is what was still remaining. That section right there are the 3 towers. Each tower had its own name. Those 3 towers were left standing, and a portion of the western wall. That was the palace of either Herod or Pilate. It was Roman built. They left the western wall of the city portion and the 3 towers. Does that mean they left the western wall of the temple? No. Plowed as a field, heaps of Jerusalem. This is photos from the 1800s where basically they've plowed the whole thing. Okay. It was rebuilt, Alina Capitolina. They built the city there about, I think that's like 100, 150 years, don't quote me on that. But it was built after the temple was destroyed, 135 AD. There we go, don't need to know the name. They dedicated the city to the god Jupiter. They built a temple to the goddess Venus, which is now known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That people didn't know that when they're going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to worship, they're actually worshiping in a temple that was built for the goddess Venus. The Arabs later called it Aliyah. When they gained control, the city was eventually rebuilt. It's been destroyed and rebuilt who knows how many times, and now we simply call it Jerusalem. All right. So, Jesus said, not one stone upon the other would be left remaining of the city and the temple, and not one stone was remaining. If you go to Jerusalem today, there'll be a lot of tourists. They say, oh, upper room is here, and the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre is here, and this is here, and you're walking the streets that Peter and Jesus walked. Well, according to Jesus, that ain't true. According to Josephus, who saw it, that ain't true. Josephus actually was there. He was seeing this firsthand, and he said, it's not there. There is the Traveler of Seville. He came there years and years and years later, and he was overlooking the thing, said, there's nothing here. It's farm fields. You know, there's some stuff over here, but Jerusalem, nothing there. Is the western wall of the temple? No, couldn't possibly be. When they destroyed the city, eventually they put the stuff back together, or tried to assemble it back together. You're not going to want to move stones as far, very far away. You're going to want to use stones that are there. So are the stones there from the wall of the temple? Probably, but not necessarily in the order that was there when Jesus saw it. The streets that, you're walking on, Jesus didn't walk those streets. They were plowed up. Now, you go to something called the Broad Wall. That's from the first Jerusalem. Yeah, that's there because the city then wasn't destroyed fully. When they build cities, it's old city, the new city, the new city, the new city. So you go down a couple of layers. Yeah, you're looking at the time of the Maccabees. You're looking at the time of the first temple. You can go back to Melchizedek. But anything in that city that was from the time of Christ, so probably, between 30 AD and 70 AD, all of it is gone. It's all tourist traps. You're paying to see something that was built after, 135 AD. But you're not walking where Christ walked. You're walking in the general vicinity, but you're not walking the same stones. Rome divided. Daniel predicted 10 separate kingdoms. Ostrogoths, Vandals, and Heruli were conquered. And the kids learned on Friday that I can't remember, I think it was the Ostrogoths, ended up being conquered because of a volcano that went off. It created this massive cold, which created all sorts of famine and disease, and that led to them being a weakened society, and the Romans were able to conquer them and vanquish them, but they couldn't conquer and vanquish everybody. The rock, who's the rock? Jesus. Jesus is represented by a rock in Deuteronomy and Exodus and Genesis. He's a stone. There's lots of references to Christ as our rock. So the rock came down, conquered the stone, and then grew. Rocks as symbols. Throughout history, we've seen rocks as symbols. Jacob and Laban, Joshua, they all set up rocks as monuments or, deal makers. Jacob and Laban, they set up a bunch of stones and they said, he who crosses this stone basically takes his life into his own hands. To this day, people in the Middle East do not like to remove rocks or move rocks if they look like they've been set up as a monument, for the fact that they may be marking an agreement. We see this in America with Geronimo. They made a treaty. Geronimo set out a blanket, put a stone on the blanket to represent the treaty. And he said, we placed a large stone on the blanket before us. Our treaty was made by this stone or next to this stone. It was to last until the stone should crumble. But it didn't. But that was something that was passed down through many, 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 many generations. As stone, as something sure, solid, and something that you can what? Something that you can count on. All right, I will go and prepare a place for you. What was Jesus going to prepare? A home, a new city, mansions, just remake everything. All right, they tried to rebuild the Jerusalem walls. There's 12 gates, there's 12 tribes written on the gates. The gates are made of pearls, and you have the sons all written on there for the tribes. The Golden Gate, back in the Middle Ages, and I forget the year, but one of the Ottoman kings, I believe it was Solomon the Great, heard the prophecy of the Messiah coming through the Golden Gate. It had already happened. He decided to block up the Golden Gate so that the Messiah couldn't come through. Do you think that was going to stop the Messiah? No. But he'd already come through, so it didn't matter. All right, building the wall was like jasper. The city was pure gold, like unto glass. And the walls were jasper. The gates were pearls. Did you know pearls come in all sorts of different colors? They're not just white. You can have pink pearls, purple pearls, greenish blue pearls. You can have black pearls. You can have all sorts of pearls. Do you think all the gates are just white? Or do you think they could be multiple colors? They could be multiple colors. All right? The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them were the names of the 12 apostles. And we've got all these stones. What do you think these stones look like? Well, here's the stones. We have the stones in Revelation 21. But do you know that the stones are also listed in Exodus 28? The stones in the breastplate. By the time that you get to the New Testament, the names had changed somewhat. And this one's too big to pass around. But these are the stones of Aaron's breastplate, what they could possibly look like. The stones could be, there's sardis, there's topaz. Topaz could come in all those colors. Then you've got your garnets or your rubies, carbuncles, emeralds, sapphires. Look at how many colors sapphires come in. That's what, to the question of where the Ten Commandments made of lapis or sapphire. Sapphires aren't just blue. They could be any color. So sapphire's out, if it was just supposed to be blue. But sapphires, diamonds, lapis, agates, amethyst. We've got all of these stones that could be all these different shades and all these different colors. Do you think that is a pretty foundation? That is a gorgeous foundation. And with the gold and the light of God coming out of that throne, that city is just sparkling. Cities lie as 4 square, 12,000 furlongs. In other words, when you do all the math, the lovely math, it equals 1,500 miles on one side, 1,500 miles on the other side, 1,500 miles on that side, 1,500 miles on that side, 1,500 miles up. Is that a big city? That's like half the United States. High priest wore the breastplate of precious stones. The stone came down, crushed that statue. It represents that Christ is going to win. He always wins. And his kingdom is going to what? Last forever. All right. Thank you for sticking with me. All right, so what we're going to do now, the kids, if they want to do crafts, they can go downstairs. I've got some special gemstone buckets for the kids that they can decorate and look through and find gemstones. So kids can do that. We're also going to have a question and answer session right now. So you can go do gemstones, we can do question and answer session, and I think that about covers it. All right. So, oh, the kids already have the gemstone buckets?